All right, traders, in this lesson, we are going to be adding a backtester display to the pin bar strategy script from the previous lesson. So I'm achieving this using just tables and a little bit of inbuilt mathematics into our script based on some of the inbuilt strategy parameters and variables. So without further ado, let's jump into this lesson. It should be a relatively short one because we'll just be copying and pasting a lot of template code over. And this code should be reusable on pretty much any strategy script that you create. So first of all, I'm going to come down the list of lessons here and click on the pin bar strategy lesson, and then scroll down and click in here and copy the source code into my Pine editor. And now we have the pin bar strategy on our chart. You can see that it's not really calculating any position sizing code here, but we'll fix that in a moment. So first of all, let me open up the source code and scroll all the way down to the bottom here. And I'm going to create some blank space to get started with the backtester table code. So the first thing I need to do is get a couple of extra user inputs. So we need 3 user inputs here. We need a starting balance, our risk per trade as a percentage of our account balance, and a Boolean sort of option for turning on and off the backtest display. So I'm going to copy this code up to my user input section here and paste it at the bottom of my settings. Paste it in there. So we're getting a starting balance, which is just a float type, a risk per trade, which is also a float type, and a draw tester, which is a Boolean type. And so by default, we'll have a $10,000 account balance and risking 1% per trade. Now let me scroll down back to the bottom here, and I'll paste in another block of code and explain what we're doing. So the first thing we're doing here is declaring a bunch of statistical variables. These are balance tracking variables for our backtester simulation. So first we're going to track our running balance, and initially it's going to be initialized as our starting balance from the settings menu. Then we're going to save our current drawdown as a percentage, our maximum drawdown, our maximum balance or our maximum return, our maximum capital gain throughout the historical backtest, how many pips we accumulated, how many trades won, how many lost, and how many won in total, and how many lost in total. We have quite a few variables here. These are the main ones I use in my own testing to analyze the efficacy of a strategy. And if I like the metrics I see here, then I will dive deeper into a strategy. I'll try to optimize it, improve its return and max drawdown, only if I like the look of it based on these metrics. So you can add more metrics if you want to down the line once you get more proficient with PineScript and you understand the backtesting process intimately. You can add as many strategy statistics that you want. You can track the max adverse excursion or favorable excursion. That's something I do sometimes. You can track how many bars on average you're in a trade, for example. There's a lot of different things you could track. But for now, we'll keep it simple. We're just going to track our running balance, our max drawdown, our return, total pips, and win rate. I also sometimes track my break-even trades if I have a strategy that has a break-even sort of functionality included in it. But for now, this will do. Let's move on to the next part of our code, which is going to check if we have just had a winning trade. So if I paste this code in here, I'll explain what we're doing. The first thing we're doing is checking, is the inbuilt variable win trades, strategy.win trades. This tracks how many trades I've won in the backtester simulation. If the current bar's total win trades is not equal to the previous bar's total win trades, that means that we've won a trade. So the previous bar closed out a winning trade. And then we increase our account balance by our risk per trade divided by 100. That way we can put our risk per trade into the settings menu as a whole number. So we put 1 into the settings menu, which is the default setting. Then this will convert that 1 into 0.01 multiplied by our account balance. So that will give us our 1% risk as a dollar amount. And then we multiply that dollar amount by our risk reward profile. So by default with this particular strategy, we have a 1-to-1 risk reward. So if we had a winning trade, our account balance should increase by 1%. Keep in mind, this does not track commission costs. It does not track slippage. It does not track carry costs or swap rates. It doesn't track any of the hidden costs of trading because those costs differ based on the market you're trading, based on the broker you're using, based on how you trade, the time frame you're trading, your position sizing. There's a lot of variables at play with tracking that information. So you need to do your own due diligence with that to get an accurate reading on a strategy's performance. You can add that information to this backtester simulation if you want to. Personally, I just factor that in after the fact. So if I have a rough idea of what my cost for trading is, what my slippage is, and how that affects my trades, I kind of just factor that into the strategy in theory. So for example, once I'm done finding markets that show promise and I export my trade data into a spreadsheet, which I'll show you how to do in a future lesson, and I perform detailed analysis on the strategy performance, I will usually factor in those costs of trading during that part of the process, not during the chart analysis part. I find that to be easier. That's just my personal preference, because I do find it to be quite tricky to code that stuff into PineScript, especially given the fact that we all use different brokers, we all trade different markets and timeframes. I'll leave that up to you guys to handle. Perhaps in a future lesson we'll cover how to add that to this code, but for now we'll keep it simple. We're just tracking the theoretical perfect performance of a strategy. Obviously no strategy will be perfect. You're not going to get perfect fills on your take profits or your stop losses for that matter. So please keep all of that in mind. If you see a strategy that has a great return and win rate, there is a very, very, very good chance that the strategy will not perform quite as perfectly as your metrics will tell you. Anyway, moving on. After we have increased our account balance, our running balance by however much we won based on a percentage of our account balance, our risk per trade, then we increase our total pips by how many pips we gained. So for this, I get the absolute value of our entry price minus our target price. That will give us our pip distance from our entry to our exit price. And then I convert that into a whole number so that we can track the whole number pip amount. Next up, I increment our total wins by 1. And then I check if our current running balance is greater than our maximum balance, our max account balance. Then I override our max account balance with the current running balance. This is used for tracking our drawdown once we encounter some losing trades. So moving on, the next thing I do is detect losing trades. So if I paste this block of code in here, we're doing the same thing here. We're checking, is the current bar's losing trade count not equal to the previous bar's losing trade count? If that is the case, then we just lost a trade and this code gets executed. We decrease our account balance using the same formula. There is a mistake here, I just noticed. We don't want to use our risk reward multiplier here, because the risk reward multiplier increases our target distance without affecting our stop loss distance. So if our trade loses, we lose our risk per trade as a percentage of our account balance. We should not multiply that by the risk reward. So that's a mistake there. I'll get rid of that. The next thing we do is we decrease or subtract from our total pips our losing pips distance. So our absolute value of our trade stop loss price minus our entry price. The reason we convert this to an absolute number is so that we don't have to change the code whether we're long or short, because whatever number we get here will be the distance between our entry and stop loss price. On some trades it'll be a negative number, on others it will be a positive number, and this math.abs function will just convert both into a positive number. Then we subtract that from our total pips while converting to a whole number as well. And I just use my Zen library to access the toWhole function and another function which we'll cover in a moment. Just to keep things simple, you can go to my Zen library and copy this function out if you don't want to use my library in your scripts. But moving on, we then increase our total loss count by 1, and then we update our drawdown. So our drawdown variable is our running drawdown, our current drawdown, and that's calculated by dividing our current balance by our maximum account balance. And then we subtract 1 to turn that into a percentage. And if our running drawdown, our current drawdown, is less than our maximum drawdown, because remember, drawdown will be a negative percentage. If that negative current drawdown is less than our maximum drawdown, then the same way we track our maximum balance, we do that with our max drawdown. So we reassign or overwrite our max drawdown with our current drawdown. And that allows us to track our biggest drawdown on historical data. And that's it. We are now tracking all of the metrics we need to display onto our backtested display table. The last thing to do is actually add that table to our chart. So I'll copy our table code over. What we're doing here is creating a persistent variable, which is a table, and it's called test table. So we'll have one table variable for our entire chart. So you can't display a table based on a candle, a historical candle, it will only display one table. And in this case, we're going to display a table on the last bar on our chart that shows our backtesting metrics. So we create a persistent table here so that this table is not recreated on every single bar, because that would be redundant. So this is just a little bit of optimization. We're creating a single table. The table is in the top right position. If you get rid of top right and press Control Space, here are all the options we have to select from when creating a table. You could add a user input to the settings menu to adjust where this table displays. For now, I'm going to keep this as just top right. Then we need to define our columns and rows. So I've defined 5 columns here and 2 rows. And then I set the border width to 1. I don't bother touching any of the other parameters in this table because I don't really need them. But if you want to play around with them and change the color of your table, for example, you can overwrite some of those other parameters there. The next thing I do here is create a simple custom function. That's what the F underscore stands for, function underscore fill cell. And this custom function just makes it a little bit easier to manipulate our table data. So this custom function takes a bunch of inputs here. It takes the table ID, which in this case will be test table. It takes a column number, a row number, a string title, and a string value, a background color, and a text color. Then we create a string within the scope of this fill cell function called cell text. And this is set to our title input plus, and then we create a new line using this \n new line escape character. That's what that's called. If you put that into a string, it will move the next text that you add onto a new line. And the next string we add is our value parameter. So we have a title and then a value. Once we combine those two strings into one, then we use the table.cell function to populate our table with data. So this table.cell function takes a table ID, a row and column ID or index, a cell text, a background color, and a text color parameter. You can adjust some other parameters in this cell function, but we are going to leave most of those alone. We're just going to work with these ones for now. We're going to keep this table simple because, in my opinion, simple is better. But if you want to get a bit more fancy and format your table in a more interesting manner, you can do that using some of these other parameters here. Make sure to go back and watch the lesson on tables if you're unfamiliar with this function to see how all of the different parameters affect your table. But moving on, I will paste in the second last block of code here for our table display. And I'll keep this one simple. We'll fill out the other data soon, but for now, I want to explain what we're doing here. So this is where we draw our table. The first thing I do here is create a VAR persistent variable, BG color. This is the background color of our table. And I set it to color.black with 0% transparency. We could just set this to color.black. We don't need to use the color.new since we have 0% transparency. This variable by default will have 0% transparency. But if you wanted to, you could turn this into a user input by setting this to input.color. And then the user could adjust the color in the settings menu here of the default background color of our table. For now, I'm just going to leave this hard-coded as black. I'll explain why we create a background color variable in a moment. But the next thing we do is check, is the current bar the last confirmed historical bar on our chart? That would be this bar here, because this one is a real-time bar. This is the last confirmed historical bar. If we are on that bar, if PineScript is running on this bar, our code is being executed on that bar, then this code gets executed. And here we check if draw tester is turned on in the settings menu, then we want to start drawing or populating our table with the relevant data. So the first thing I do here is calculate our dollar return, how much money we have made in dollar terms. And that's achieved by simply subtracting our starting balance from our current running balance. That will give us the difference, the dollar return, and then we'll plot that onto our table in a moment. But the next thing we do here is we fill our first cell of our test table with how many total trades the strategy took. So if I save my code now, hopefully this compiles without any problems. There we go. If I open up the settings menu, here are our backtester settings. Starting balance of 10,000 and a risk per trade of 1%. Draw backtester is turned on by default. Here is our table starting to be drawn. We need to add more data to it, but for now, this is how we start that process. So our fill cell function takes our test table ID, which is this variable here, a column and row. So 0, 0 will be the very first cell in our table, then a title, so total trades, and then our function creates a new line and then adds our value parameter here, which is our strategy's total closed trades converted into a string. And then that gives us 221. So strategy.closed trades will return the number of trades which were closed for the whole backtesting period. So total trades will not count any open positions, only closed confirmed trades. Then we provide our background color for the cell and the text color for the cell. So a black cell and a white text is what we are drawing here. And that's really it. The last thing to do now is populate the rest of our data using this same function. And all we need to do is change the column and row for each cell, and obviously the title and the value. So let me copy in the rest of this code here, paste that in there. That is the end of our backtest code. First of all, notice that the columns and rows are laid out like this. So 0 is the first column, 0 is the first row, 1 is the second column, and then we have to start the row again. So 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. If I save our code here, this is column 0, row 0. This is column 0, row 1. This is column 1, row 0. This is column 1, row 1. This is column 2, row 0. This is column 2, row 1, etc. And then we populate our values with the corresponding data. So we have our win rate here. Our win rate is just our win trades, total win trades divided by total closed trades. So in this example, we don't actually use our total wins and total loss. If we wanted to, we could get rid of all of this, all of these variables. If you wanted to track them individually, for example, you could track how many long trades won versus how many short trades won or lost, for example. You could do that using this sort of approach. For now, to keep this code really simple, I'm going to delete these, but that is how you could track how many long trades or short trades won. You could track your long win rate and your short win rate separately if you wanted to. Some strategies will perform better in a particular direction, especially depending on the market you're trading. For example, stock market strategies tend to perform better to the long side over time. So you may want to track how your strategy performs long versus short. But for now, I'll get rid of those variables to keep our code a little bit tidier. It's also worth mentioning while we're here that you don't need to track your balance and drawdown and all of that manually if you don't want to. I'm just showing you an alternative method to tracking this sort of information. This concept also applies to indicator scripts. So if you don't want to use the inbuilt strategy tester, you can still check your theoretical return and max drawdown and some of your other trading statistics on an indicator script. But obviously you'll need to use an alternative method to detect if a trade wins or loses by checking if your stop loss or take profit was hit and then adjusting your metrics accordingly. But one alternative to this, instead of tracking your max drawdown and your max balance and all of that sort of thing, is you could use the inbuilt strategy variables. So instead of having your starting balance here, you could use strategy.initial capital, and then you don't need a user input here for specifying your starting capital. The reason I've written the code the way I have here is because sometimes I use this backtester display in regular indicator scripts that do not have access to the strategy inbuilt variables. But I thought I'd better mention before we move on that you don't need to copy my method for doing this. You could adapt this to rely solely on the strategy inbuilt variables, and then your metrics here will be identical to the strategy tester, the same way our win rate is. But our max drawdown and our net profit are going to be off slightly because of the way we calculate our position size using the math.floor function here, instead of just calculating a percentage of our account balance without factoring the position sizing. But we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. Let's continue the lesson. And so once we get our win rate, we truncate or cut the excess decimals off the resulting number. If I get rid of this truncate function and save our code, watch our win rate here. Now we have like 8 or 9 decimal places. I don't know how many that is, but it's too many. We don't need that many. That's just how PineScript operates by default. I've created a custom function in my Zen library that will cut the excess decimals. You can specify how many decimals you want to cut it to. So we could cut it to 1 decimal if we put in a comma and a 1 here. And if I save my code, our win rate will now not compile because I put that comma in the wrong place. 1 second here. I need to put it inside the parentheses of this truncate function here. There we go. Now we're truncating or cutting our decimal places down to 1 decimal place. By default, this truncate function cuts it down to 2, so we don't need to specify the decimal parameter if we don't want to. And then the next thing we do is draw our starting balance, our ending balance, so our running balance, also truncated to 2 decimal places. We draw our return, our total dollar return. So this is plotting our dollar return to the table. Notice that we changed the color of our total return to green if it was a positive return and red if it was a negative return. So if we lost money, this number would be in red, but this particular strategy on this time frame made money, so it's green. Next, we draw our total pips. So this strategy made 8,600 pips over several years on the daily time frame. It sounds like a lot of pips, but it's really not for a daily chart strategy. We assign the default background color to most of these cells, but the final 2 here, return and max drawdown, max DD, those are these 2 cells here. Notice that I overrode our background color to green or red for return based on whether we made money, and our max drawdown is always red. So here's our max drawdown cell. It's always set to a background color of red and a text color of white. Our return percentage cell, however, which is calculated by dividing our dollar return by our starting balance and then multiplying that by 100 and then truncating the excess decimal places. If I scroll to the end here, this checks if our dollar return was positive. If so, the background color is green. If not, then it's set to red. So if I open up a market here that was not profitable with this particular strategy, here's one. You can see that this market, Aussie Swiss franc, took 203 trades, had a negative $500 return, which was a minus 5% return with an 18% max drawdown. So this way we can quickly and easily flick through markets by hitting the space key. And we can just keep an eye on these numbers and see if anything jumps out at us as interesting. So Aussie dollar has an interesting return there. That's a decent return for one market. That is an acceptable return metric for me in my trading. I would investigate this particular pair to add to a portfolio for this particular strategy. If we keep going through, I wouldn't add CAD Swiss. I wouldn't add CAD Yen. I might add Swiss Yen. A 2-to-1 return isn't too bad. If we go down to Euro Yen, here's a decent return as well, similar to Aussie dollar. And you get the idea. That is the purpose of this backtested display. It's not perfect. It will not account for the things I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, like commission costs, that sort of thing, slippage. But it is a good start to speed up your backtesting process, help you isolate or identify markets that may perform well with whatever strategy you've created. You can copy and paste all of this code into any strategy script and it will work just fine, as far as I know. Perhaps with the more complicated strategies, you may need to adapt this code a little bit to make more sense with whatever strategy you're trading. But for a simple fixed target, fixed stop loss strategy, this code should work just fine. Just make sure to remember to copy in the backtester settings as well. Now, to wrap up this lesson, I'm going to do one final thing. I'm going to add our position size code to our trade entries so that we actually have a position size greater than 1 contract. So to do that, I'm going to jump back over to the course material. I'm going to select our calculating position size lesson. And for this, I'm just going to copy this line of code here, our position size code, jump back into the Pine editor, open up my code, paste this line of code in here, and then add the QTY, the quantity parameter, to our entry function and just pass in position size. One thing I could do here is change this to math.absolute. And now if I copy this into our short trades, it will work just fine as well. Even though our stop loss is above our entry, this math.abs function will return that distance as a whole number. So now I can just copy this line of code down into here as well, save my code, and now we should be getting similar metrics here. So our total return, 43.4%, says the strategy tester. Our inbuilt backtester display is slightly different, 43.18%. And our drawdown is very similar, max drawdown 12.33% versus 12.31%. The reason for that difference, that slight difference, is just in our position size calculation code using the floor function, we'll get a slightly different position sizing per trade compared to our backtester display, which simply tracks a flat 1% per trade. Now, there are a couple of problems with this code if you are trading on a broker that doesn't allow dynamic position sizing. So any broker that uses lot sizes, your metrics will be very different because this display here tracks a flat 1% per trade. If you need to trade mini lots or full lots on your account, your risk per trade isn't always going to be exactly 1%. Depending on your account balance size, it's going to be close, but it's not going to be a perfect 1%. On Oanda, you can risk a perfect 1% because when you open up the trade window, you can actually trade as many units as you want. You don't need to trade in mini lots or full standard lots. In a future lesson, I'll go into more detail about backtesting metrics. We can add the code to calculate lots and mini lots. We can also add the code to enter on the open of an X bar so that we account for gaps in price action. That's important for stock trading strategies in particular, and some Forex trading strategies. There are gaps in Forex markets depending on your broker. Oanda fills those gaps with candles, so you don't see any gaps on this particular chart. That's why I like Oanda's data feed. It is just really simple and easy to work with, but we will cover more complex data feeds in a future lesson. For now, that will do it for today's lesson. The source code, as always, will be below. I'll paste the entire source code below, including the pin bar strategy code. I will change the title here to say backtest display as well. That way you get a feel for exactly how this works. But if you want to add this to your own scripts, all you need to do is copy this code and copy this code into your scripts. In fact, I might include two source codes below. I'll include this full source code and one next to it that just contains this code here so that you can just quickly and easily copy this into your scripts. Oh, and I nearly forgot, before we end this lesson, I want to show you guys how to display trade information that can help you enter your positions when a signal is detected. So we're going to use a label to draw our entry price, our stop loss price, and our target price. That way, when we enter a trade in the order panel here, or in your broker, you can enter your entry price here, your stop loss, and your take profit very quickly without having to read the numbers up here in the indicator status bar. So the way we do this is really simple. I'll open up the source code again. We need to create two VAR variables. One is a label, one is a string. So the first variable here is just called last trade label, and it's set to NA by default. And then string format is used to format the price value to a certain amount of decimals. So this is designed for Forex markets. You can change this for crypto markets and other markets if you want to, or stocks, for example. This just checks, is the current symbol a yen pair? So if we jump over to euro yen, for example. Now we're on a yen pair, so we will format our price value to 3 decimal places, since there are 3 decimal places up here on the price scale. Otherwise, if we're on any other pair, it will be formatted to 5 decimal places. And then to draw our entry price, stops, and targets, I'm going to paste in some code here. This just assigns our last trade label, this label variable we created here, to a new label at the current bar index. We draw the label at the price target in the case of a long trade, plus a half ATR. So we just divide the ATR by half. That just makes sure that the label draws away from price action so that we can actually read it when we're putting in our orders. The text is set to EP, which is entry price, and that's just set to the string.toString function. We format our entry price to our decimal places here. And then we bump that down to a new line and put in our take profit TP. We just format our target to the relevant amount of decimals, and then stop loss equals toString trade stop, and format that string as well. And the color of this label for long trades is going to be green, and the size I set to large so it's easy to read when a trade does pop up. Next, I'll copy over our short trade label, which is exactly the same, except that we are adding the label to our instead of our target, and it is a red label. Apart from that, everything else is the same. And then every time a new label is created, we delete the previous one. That way we don't have labels all over our chart. This is just to help us enter the current trade. So next time a trade pops up, we'll have our trade entry data on our chart. Easy to read. So now if I save my code, watch what will happen here. We now have this big label here. If I put on the bar replay tool, let's assume this was a live market. This is a daily chart. So you should have plenty of time to enter your orders the next day once a signal is confirmed. But on an intraday time frame, entering your orders quickly is kind of important, especially if a market's moving quickly. So what this new feature will allow us to do is, if I click one more replay, here is a valid setup. As soon as that setup closes and is confirmed, on the open of the next bar, we'll have this label drawing here. We can open up our order panel, turn on our stop and take profit, and then put in our entry price, so 129.08. Our take profit is 130.59, and our stop loss is 127.57. Make sure that you've set your risk up appropriately, so 1% of my account balance there, and then I can click the buy or sell button, and that will enter my position, my order. It'll send this data to my broker, a limit order to enter at the closing price of this confirmed setup. And it didn't take me very long to do that. If I had to hover over this candle and read these numbers and I had to go back and forth, that can take a little while. I actually created this label on an indicator that I gave to my sister. I'm teaching my sister to trade currently. She's very, very inexperienced at trading. It's kind of funny, actually. It's easy to forget how much there is to learn once you've been trading for a couple of years. And to make her life a little bit easier in entering orders, the strategy that I have her trading has this functionality in it. So every time a setup appears, there's a big label here that will give her her entry price, her take profit, stop loss, and then she can just enter that information into the order panel and click the button, and it's done. She doesn't have to measure out the pips and mess around too much, because the strategy I have her trading is a 1 hour strategy, 1 hour chart strategy, and orders need to be placed relatively quickly because it's a momentum strategy. So often the signal will just take off without you if you take too long to enter your orders. Anyway, that's it for this lesson. I hope you found this interesting. I will speak with you in the next lesson. Take care.